Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Everybody, welcome back to another video. So today this is just basically another recent reads video. I have been reading some books that I really want to talk about, so I am still going to do a wrap up at the end of November. But there are 3 books in here specifically, and I'm only going to really be talking about 3.5 because I have 2 of these I've talked about a lot before. But they're on my mind. I have some thoughts and I want to share them with you. And I always worry that when I read a book like this and I wait to the end of the month to do my wrap up, then my thoughts are like kind of rushed because I'm trying to get all of the books done in the same video. So this is just a few book reviews, but you're going to get some in-depth thoughts. Hopefully. So let's talk about the first book that I want to talk about. It is The Songbird and the Heart of Stone by Carissa Broadbent. So if you are not new here, you're probably very aware that Carissa Broadbent is one of my favorite authors. I love her books. I love her books so much. I think she is such a wonderful fantasy romance author. I actually first discovered her through the War of Lost Hearts series, which is still my favorite. I love that series so much. I think it is one of the best fantasy romance series, and it's very underrated compared to her Serpent and the Wings of Night series, which in my opinion is not as good. I don't think it's as good objectively, and I personally don't like it as much, but I do see why it's more popular because it's definitely more written to trend than the War of Lost Hearts series is. So I also have done multiple videos talking about Carissa Broadbent, how much I love her. I love how she builds her worlds. I love her storytelling. I love her romances. I love her characters. I think she is truly doing something special in a subgenre that is currently kind of feeling overrun with a lot of mid to poor books. You know, I've still found some gems. I still love Romantasy, but it is true that because it is so popular, it's getting overrun with a lot of mediocre or less books, right? So I was so hyped to hear about this book. It's been my most anticipated book of the whole year. I couldn't wait for it. I actually used to be on Carissa Broadbent's ARC team when she was only indie. Since she's gotten picked up by Bramble, which this is her first new release from Bramble. It's on my shelf over there, that's why I pointed over there. I have been a little worried, or maybe not worried, yeah, kind of worried, curious about what was going to change with her writing. And I don't really feel like anything has changed majorly, but I will say that this book was hugely disappointing to me. I was so disappointed in this book. I gave it 3 stars, and truthfully, if I was not such a huge fan of this author, and, you know, if I didn't have such a deep connection to some of her previous books, I probably would have been even harsher because I do not think this is a good book. I think this is much below the level of what we're used to getting from Carissa Broadbent. And I also feel like, in general, it's not as good. I don't feel like it's up to par as far as her other books are concerned, or as far as what I would expect from such a huge author that is picked up by a pretty big, although new, imprint. You know, Tor is a big imprint. Bramble is their new romantic imprint, which I thought was supposed to be fantasy romance, but it looks like they're doing other types of romance too. Anyway. So this is book 3, but it is the beginning of a new duet, I believe, with a new couple. So books 1 and 2 are in the same world with an overarching plot throughout the whole series of books. But that is a contained romance and plot within 1 and 2. So book 2 and 3 are featuring 2 different characters, a new romance, and a new plot that's going to be happening with the same continued overarching plot in the same world, right? So this book follows Mishi, who is our heroine, and we met her, we learned quite a bit about her in the first books in the series. She is a vampire who's turned kind of against her will, and she is definitely having a lot of trauma with some things that have happened in her past. You know, she was sort of an acolyte to the sun god, and her magic manifests in a way that causes her a lot of pain because she is a vampire and she still has some of those sun powers, and every time she uses her magic, it causes her physical damage and physical pain. Now, I will say that's something I found very interesting about this book and about this character. I think that it's very compelling when you put a character in a fantasy world and magic is supposed to be like this big powerful thing, but there's a cost to it, like every time they use it, and I really liked that here. That's something that I thought was done well. Mishi overall, I'm probably pronouncing her name wrong, but I am so bad at remembering that. Please just forgive me, okay? I know that there's a correct way to pronounce it. I have the audiobook and I know there's a pronunciation in the book. It comes out of my mouth the way that I've always said it, so I'm sorry. So Mishi is a good character. I really like her as a character. I like her as a heroine. I think she was really well developed. I think she is obviously the shining star in this book. And because this is a duet, I know we're not going to get a full romance in book 1. However, all that being said, I just don't feel like there was enough else other than this individual character to keep this at a really well-loved book for me. Because this is a fantasy romance, I expected there to be, even though it's a duology, I did expect there to be more romantic development, or at least more hints of romantic development. And I don't, while we did get some here, this felt so shallow and so weak, and that combined with the fact that our hero, who is Asar, who is basically taking her on a journey with him to the underworld so they can resurrect the god of death. And Asar is a bastard prince of the god of shadow. So he's a very, on paper, he's a very complicated hero, right? But in reality, when we actually see him in the book, he's very, very lacking in dimension. He is very much a stereotypical love interest. He's dark, he's broody, he's grumpy, you know. There's not really anything about him that is fully fleshed out, or anything about him that really makes me feel like he's a compelling love interest in this. So that was a major point of frustration for me, is the fact that I felt like he was so lacking dimension and development. And this is something that I think that this author really, really does well, specifically with her male characters. I think she creates them to be very compelling. They don't feel like a stand-in for every other fantasy romance that I've read, right? And that's exactly what he felt like here. And that's especially disappointing considering her history with her male characters, but also with the setup that she surrounded him as, right? Bastard son of the shadow god. He's got a lot of tortured demons in his past as well. She takes her on a journey to the underworld. They're going to resurrect the death god. Like, that all sounds fantastic, right? That sounds like it's going to be amazing, amazing. And this is an author that I fully, fully trust to give me the execution that I'm looking for, to get me hooked, to make me feel things, to make me compelled, to make me not want to keep reading. And not a single thing of that happened in this book for me. This book was painful to get through. I wanted to DNF this book so bad, so many times. I felt like it was painfully slow. Not just in terms of plot. I've heard some people say that this is like character driven or whatever, and it is with Mishi, but as a whole, it isn't necessarily the character-driven book that I would expect a fantasy romance to be, because the lack of development with the relationship is a huge part of their character development, and that was very minimal here. It was minimal, stuff happened, but it never had an impact. It never had anything that made me feel like anything at all, and I'm so disappointed in that, okay? So all of that jumbled up talk, ranting and raving, is just to say that this had potential. The author is one of my favorites. I know she can write a powerful, moving story. I really like this world. I like this character. I like the setup. I like everything about it. But it was so lacking in punch and visceral emotion and just anything really at all. The plot was a huge point of concern for me because it moves at a snail's pace. Now, that's not a bad thing. I love slow books. If you've been here, you know I love slow books. I love books that take their time, that show me sides of characters that we wouldn't get to see if we didn't take this down to a snail's pace. Like, I love it. I love it so much. But the plot was slow. It was also circular and repetitive. We were doing the same thing. They were not making any forward motion. And even at times when the plot is slow in her other books, something this author does really, really well to fill that gap is she gives you excellent character development and relationship development. She gets you into their psyche. She gets you into this relationship that is maybe going to develop. And because this is a two-part series, the potential for having tension and drawing this out was so high, and it was just a miss. It was just a miss. There was nothing about this book at all that really had me rooting for it. So I know, like, I'm ranting and raving because I'm so disappointed because I had my hopes up so high for this book because this author has always delivered for me, but this was truly so disappointing. So the plot it didn't even really meander, it just moved so slowly and circularly, so it didn't feel like anything was happening. The pages in this book, this isn't a long book, it felt like it took me forever to read, and I did read it quickly because I wanted to get this read before I heard any other reviews, so I hadn't paid attention to any reviews before I left my review on this, before I read this, so all of my thoughts, they come from my own little brain, right? Like I did a really good job of that, of not getting influenced by what anybody else was saying. I just put blinders on and I was like, I don't want to see anything about this book until I get to read it. So I powered through it, right? I powered through it, read it in 2 days, and it was one of the most disappointing books I've read this year, if not the most disappointing book that I have read. And again, that's not to say this is a terrible book, but it is to say I have read much better from her. Much better from her in a novella. Six Scorched Roses is a million times better than this. Much better book in this world. Slaying the Vampire Conqueror is fantastic. I love that book. It is still my favorite book in this world. Much better romances. Like, she does romances so good, you guys. She builds it so beautifully. I don't care if there's steam in here, if there's nothing else to it, and that's what this book felt like. So this book very much felt like it was written to the trends of what readers are clamoring for fantasy romance. And she has not done that a lot before. She started to do that with the Serpent book duet. And it's just disappointing. It's disappointing. But at the same time, I recognize that there's a huge audience. I feel like I'm probably the only one who felt like this. I know I'm not the only one. I had a few comments. Emily, I know you're one of them, on my Goodreads review who felt the same as I did. So shout out to you. Thank you very much for that. But yeah, this book was so disappointing to me. One other thing that I didn't mention is the writing. For the first time, I noticed poor writing quality here. Now, I feel like Carissa Broadbent is a really great writer. I think her prose is good. I think her writing on a line level is really good. I think the way that she builds her worlds, the way that she constructs her stories, all of the technical aspects of writing, I think is really quite good. I did not feel like it was quite good here at all. but perhaps I am being too harsh, because it wasn't necessarily line level writing that I had a problem with, but there was something she did at the end of multiple chapters in this book that has become such a pet peeve of mine that I know I'm going to be aware of this every single time I read a fantasy romance from here on out. But so many chapters, I don't know how many, I didn't count, but I think there's probably at least 10. So many chapters in this book ended with some variation of, and then she faded into darkness, and then everything went black, and then she slipped into the void, like losing consciousness types of things. And part of that is understandable considering they're traveling through the underworld, so maybe I could see how that would happen. But do you have to end every single chapter like that? Especially because it got to be so repetitive that by the time I had read that like 4 or 5 times, I was like, oh, well. You know what it reminded me of a little bit is how in Vampire Diaries, if you've seen that show, remember there are a few seasons, or maybe the whole show, I can't really remember, where everybody dies and then they resurrect them and bring them back to life. So then like nobody's death means anything because you know they're gonna get brought back to life. Like, I feel like that's what's happened here, but like it's not death, right? It just felt like every time she did that, it lacked meaning, it lacked impact, and not only that, but it was irritating me. It was irritating me because it's weak writing. It's weak writing, and she's not a weak writer. So you're welcome for the 13-minute rant review. Again, like, I don't think this is a bad book. I think there are things that are good here, but this is not at all what I expect from a Carissa Broadbent book, and overall, I'm very disappointed in it. So that's a bummer. So I had a string of books that I didn't really love in November. Now, I did, before I actually read Songbird and the Heart of Stone, I had a 48-hour readathon with my patrons over on Patreon, and it was basically just a cozy readathon. So the prompts I made were super, super easy. The bingo board to fill out was super, super easy. It was basically just, you know, things that would be comforting and cozy, because I did that because it was suggested by Erin, one of my patrons, but I also did that because I just really fell in love with that idea, and I was feeling like I want something cozy and comforting. So one of the prompts was read your favorite subgenre or genre, and another one was reread a favorite book. So I did both. I picked my favorite subgenre, historical romance. So I reread Dreaming of You. I've read this book like 4 times now. This is my original copy that I read with all of my original annotations. And I gave away an annotated copy, which I'm just finishing up right now, to a patron who finished their bingo board. So it was so fun for me to go back, and after I had read, like, I listened to the audiobook, that's how I read it. And then I went through my physical copy to transfer my annotations to a new copy to send to my patron Serenity. And that, even though I had just read this book on audio, going through and seeing my annotations and seeing what I had marked the first time I ever read this made me just so in love with this genre, even more than I ever have been. And I'm mentioning this because of the recent talk I've seen on threads online with some historical romance authors who say that publishers, traditional publishers, don't want historical romance. They're not renewing contracts, that they're kind of worried about the future of historical romance, and some of the authors are writing in other genres, like I know Amelie Howard is, I know Sarah McLean is, and I just feel so sad about that because I love this subgenre so much, and I know so many of you do too. So I'm mentioning this just, I guess, I don't know what we can do to bring awareness. I love historical romance. Please don't take it from us traditional publishers. Like, I love it so much. Of course there are going to be indie published versions, but I worry that we're not going to see this beautiful, epic, so well crafted, beautifully written type of historical romance. And I know she hasn't written anything specifically, Lisa Kleypas, since like 2021, but there are other authors who are beautiful and wonderful. And I just am so worried that we're not going to get that anymore, right? Because maybe by the time historical romance trends again, those authors won't be writing anymore. You know, I know Beverly Jenkins for several years has said that she hasn't had a contract brought up. I know that Lorraine Heath is still under contract, and I know that Julianne Long, she just had a book come out, so I don't know if she has another one. I hope she does, but those authors that are so fine-tuned, so dialed into their craft of storytelling, like, it breaks my heart to think that it's going to be over, that they're not going to do that again anymore. And again, like I said, like, maybe they will in 5 or 10 years or whatever. I don't know what the future has in store, but are those authors going to be writing anymore? I don't know. It makes me so sad. And I mentioned that only because I saw some talk about that over the weekend, but when I annotated this, I was just sort of like, this is the type of book that I feel like the Book Talk girlies would go crazy for if they did not associate this with something that is old-fashioned or not steamy or not popular. Like, I don't know, because Derek Craven, Dreaming of You, is probably my all-time favorite historical romance. I love it so freaking much. I love the complexity of this hero who grew up in poverty. He's a self-made man. He has become very rich and very wealthy, but he did have to do a lot of terrible things to get there. Like, I just love him, how damaged he is. I love everything about him and the way that he feels like he can't love. And then he meets Sarah, who is a writer who is actually almost potentially engaged, and he like sees this beauty in her. He sees not only just this beauty, but this innocence in her, this thing that makes him want to be good. And he wants her because he wants to be good. He wants to have a part of her. Like, he holds her glasses in his pocket. Like, this type of romance needs to be around forever, and it's not like that in contemporary romance. It's just not. It's not like that. It's not like this in fantasy romance. Like, this is the type of love story that people write songs about that is just unforgettable. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Like, there are so many pages in here that I have marked. Let's see if I can find some that talk specifically about Derek Craven and how he feels about her. And I'm just sort of like, oh. And so this sign, Sarah, right? She says, I want to be with you, no matter what happens. No one in his life had ever said such a thing to him. Derek tried to think above the pounding of his heart, but she brought her soft mouth to his, and all reason was lost. Hungrily he bent over her, trying not to hurt her with the force of his kisses, trembling with an emotion as ferocious as it was tender. Stop! What? I don't mean to be so animated, but I love this book, and there is not anything like this being published today. Why do people not love this? Is it the cover? What is it? It needs more love. I just adore this book so much. And that's just one tiny thing in here, right? It has everything. It has adventure. It has danger. He's a protective hero. There's some drama with another woman, like a past lover of his. Like, there is a moment where he rescues her. He keeps her glasses. I know I said this. He keeps her glasses and he puts them in his pocket because he has to have a part of her with him all the time. He brushes her hand and he goes absolutely nuts. This is the original hand flex. If you have not read this book yet, please read it. I'm begging you. And if you don't like it, don't tell me. But you will like it because it's beautiful perfection, okay? Okay, so I read this book. Read historical romance, buy historical romance. Let's please don't go away. And yeah, so now the next book that I want to talk about is actually a contemporary romance that I did mention in my video 5 before the end. Oh, I mentioned in there that I had a book that I was very, very, very excited about that was on the Fated Mates podcast as the best romances of the year, and I just could not get this book out of my head. I knew I had to read it, and I was leaning into my mood reading, and so I picked it up. And it was no, that's the first book. That's the one I'm reading right now. I'm vlogging it, by the way. This book is Lips Like Sugar by Jess K. Hardy. So this is the second book in her series of Gen X romances, and I had read a little bit of this author's writing before because I did actually start Come As You Are, the first book in the series, a few years ago. And then, you know, for whatever reason, I think I had other commitments that I had to read physically. There wasn't an audiobook at the time. There is now. So I kind of just put it aside. So when I heard about this book, I knew that they were both in their 50s, I believe. So he's like 54. I think she's maybe, I don't know exactly how old she is. She's either late 40s, early 50s. And she has come out of a relationship, and he is like a drummer, rock star, grunge rock star god type of thing, like very popular, very famous, very attractive, very like sexy grandpa type of look, you know? And she has an ex-boyfriend that they meet at this concert, essentially. They don't meet, but they see each other. And she sees that he is with a woman, and he looks so happy. And they're talking about a wedding that's coming up, and they're both invited to this wedding. And he's like, so who are you going with? And she's like, oh, my boyfriend. And she says that looking at the drummer named Cole, who just walks in. And she catches his eye, and she tries to get him, like, to, you know, mind meld and be like, pretend you're my boyfriend, okay? And so she grabs him, she like kisses him, and he is like into it, right? He goes along with it. He's like, yes, I love this. I'll play along for sure. So the way that he responds to her, like, I'm not doing it justice, because that whole scene was so good. It was right in the beginning, and it got me hooked, because here's a woman that I feel like a lot of people can probably relate to. When you see someone from your past and you want to make sure that they see that you're thriving, and so like you see this hunk of a man walk in and you're just like, yep, he's my boyfriend. And like, how gutsy was that to just sort of like pull him in for a kiss, you know? And he absolutely like went with it. And the thing that he says to her is something like, hi sugar. And I'm just like I was losing my mind about it. It was so great. So they have a lot of chemistry, a lot of connection that night. And then they part ways because he was only in town for the wedding, and she is a baker in this town. She has a teenage son who's kind of separating himself from her, starting to grow up and move apart from her. And she's also taking care of her aging mother, who is starting to have the first signs of dementia. So she feels very locked into this place. She's got her bakery, she's got her mother, she's got her son, and he lives in like the Pacific Northwest, I believe in like Seattle. He has an adult daughter who's living with him and her new baby. So he feels like he has to stay there. She feels like she has to stay in Montana, but they can't escape this connection they felt that night when she was like, hey, he's my date. And then they actually fake dated at the wedding. And again, the connection out of control. Like the chemistry was so great. And I feel like this author did such a good job of creating this feeling of attraction and desire without leaning into what I feel like a lot of lesser talented authors or authors who are going for the obvious do. And I will say, like, I don't recall hearing upon him first seeing her and thinking she's attractive that a part of his anatomy twitched or constantly when he looked at her lips or he looked at her, you know, like, while at the same time it is very, very clear that he finds her incredibly attractive and desirable, and he wants her in every way, like soul level, physical level. Like, it's just, I feel like that's just the perfect mashup of two characters meeting each other in a romance, right? And it just, like, you could feel it. It was so palpable, and I loved it. So anyway, they part ways, they go about their separate lives. She stalks him on Instagram, he finds her on social media, and then they begin just like this series of DMing each other in a long distance relationship. And they start to fall in love that way. And it's so beautiful and so fun, and I loved watching that part of it unfold. I love a romance that happens when they're like through texts or DMs or letters or whatever. Like, I just love that so, so much. And things progress pretty well to the point where they are falling hard and deep for each other. And an opportunity presents itself where he can actually come back to where she's living to stay for a while, and they can kind of try out their relationship. Now, she's a little bit of a commitment phobe. I think that she's got a lot of fear and abandonment issues. And so she right away wants to be like, okay, physical only, right? Like, which I will say, I didn't even tell you my star rating. I gave this book 6 stars. I loved it. That is not to say that it's not without fault, because it isn't perfect. But it was such a fun reading experience, and I just loved it. And there was so much about this book that really won me over. And it was so refreshing to read an older couple romance when the 50-year-old man isn't with like a 19-year-old. Like, I loved that he found a woman so desirable and so beautiful and so attractive that was his own age group. Loved it. Loved it. And I just loved watching him fall in love with her. I loved her watching her fall in love with him. I loved watching them try to navigate their life together. I loved seeing the small gestures that he did. He is such a romantic man. He cares for her so much. I loved it. I was giddy reading this book. I thought it was so fantastic. And this, again, is very much like a slice of life book where we're just kind of following them about their daily life, right? Now, there was a point when we got to the third act conflict where I felt like, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this, because as somebody who is not a hater of a third act breakup, this one kind of tested my patience until we got to a point when I could see what the author was doing, and I thought it was perfect. I thought it worked out perfectly, right? So I loved it. I loved everything about this book. I thought it was so fun. I thought it was so engaging. I loved the narration. I listened to the audio. This is definitely going to be one of my favorite books of the year. Like, the way that this guy had me swooning as he, like, was loving her and taking care of, like, it was just so beautiful. I loved how thoughtful he was. I loved how thoughtful she was. I just found it to be delightful in every single way, and I adored it, and I highly recommend it. So I did immediately find the audio for the first book, and I'm currently listening to that right now. It will be in my next vlog, so very excited about this. Happy to find a new author that I love. Can't wait to see what she writes next. So, alright my friends, there you have it. Those are just some recent book reviews, some rants and raves and gushes. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you have made it this far, please feel free to leave me a turkey, because it's American Thanksgiving this week, and I will see you all in my next video.